It's Monday of Holy Week, and we're on a journey with Jesus to Jerusalem, and our reading is from Luke's Gospel, chapter 19, beginning to read at verse 41.
And when Jesus drew near and saw the city, he wept over it, saying, "Would that even today you knew the things that make for peace, but now they are hid from your eyes. For the days will come upon you when your enemies will cast up a bank about you and surround you and hem you in on every side and dash you to the ground, you and your children within you, and they will not leave one stone upon another in you, because you did not know the time of your visitation." And he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold, saying to them, "It is written, 'My house shall be a house of prayer,' but you have made it a den of robbers." And he was teaching daily in the temple. The chief priests and the scribes and the principal men of the people sought to destroy him, but they could not find anything they could do, for all the people hung upon his words. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
For look, the story of Jesus starts and ends in Jerusalem. The signal that flashes the coming of Christ to the world takes place in the temple in Jerusalem, when the angel Gabriel startles Zechariah, a priest going about his ordinary duties, and informs him that the Messiah is coming, and that he and his wife will have a child, John, who will be the forerunner for the coming of the King. At the end of Luke's Gospel, Jesus leaves earth in the Ascension, and that momentous event is witnessed by his followers. Jerusalem, then, is the setting for Holy Week, the backdrop of the events that happen to Jesus. At the time of Christ, the ancient city of Jerusalem had been the capital of Israel for over 1,000 years. It was established by one of Jesus' ancestors, King David, as the capital of Israel. And his son Solomon had built a magnificent temple for the worship of God in Jerusalem. For the first 600 years, Jerusalem had been the setting for the rule of the kings of Israel and Judah, David's successors. But for the last 400 years, a series of world powers had invaded the land and had seized and captured Jerusalem and ruled over its people. That started with the Babylonians in modern-day Iraq. They were then followed by the Persians from what we would call modern-day Iran. After them came the Greeks, and then finally the Romans, who at the time of Christ had occupied and controlled the land. They governed by a puppet king, Herod, whom we read of in the Gospels, and by a governor, Pontius Pilate. As you can imagine, the Jews resented being overruled by the Romans. They wanted freedom, and they are longing for independence. As Jesus approaches Jerusalem, Luke draws our attention to two of his actions. First, Jesus weeps in verse 41. And second, Jesus rages in verse 45. First, Jesus weeps. As Jesus looks at the citadel of the city from the valley below, he weeps. Why the tears? Well, Jesus knows that the city and its people will reject him. They will refuse to recognize who he is, the rightful king, the Lord coming among them, coming to his earthly city, God coming in person to the temple set aside for the worship of him. He cries because he knows the consequences of their rejection. There would not be peace, but war and terrible destruction at a time to come. Jesus weeps over Jerusalem. Second, rage. On entering the city, Jesus goes immediately to the temple. There is a convulsion there as he drives out the dealers and turns over the tables of the traders who are functioning in the temple. Can you imagine that? Jesus is incensed by rage over the commercialization of the worship in the temple. His stinging remark says it all. My house, my temple, he says, shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers. As Luke records that in verse 48. Jesus rages. Two very different emotions on display here in this passage before us on this Monday of Holy Week. Jesus weeping, Jesus raging. What makes you weep? Is it loss? The loss of a loved one? A sadness? The loss of a way of life? A loss of people with the spread of this terrible coronavirus? Is it rejection? You feel unloved. Your love is not returned. Jesus shares your tears. This Holy Week is God's moment. We should weep because there are so many who have no time for God in his world. There are so many who have turned their backs on him. They've walked away. They have rejected him. This is God's moment. In your tears, can I ask you to turn to him? What incenses you? What causes you to rage? Is it the selfishness of people who in their panic buying clear the shelves of our supermarkets? Is it those who are so selfish that they ignore the guidelines that the government has set down for the well-being of everyone on our island? And they're so selfish. Or are you like some of our young people who are incensed by the way in which we adults are ruining and destroying planet Earth? Or has your age something to do with the hypocrisy of religious people, of their leaders, or of political leaders who corrupt the Christian faith and to dismiss and exploit people that they're meant to serve? Earth your rage in God. He has the capacity to deal with it. Raw emotions are on display in Jerusalem as God comes home to his city.